This week's topic is on the concept of marriage and family, and this is generally considered an institution in American society and in most societies around the world. In fact, when you listen to politicians, particularly those running for major offices in the United States, this is often a theme that is used to call us back to past times and to anchor us in a sense of what our values are all about. In the presidential election in 1992, for instance, Vice President Dan Quayle made quite a fuss over the fact that there was a television show called Murphy Brown, and the lead character in that show made the choice to have a child outside of wedlock. This was used as a demonstration of the deteriorating family values in American society, and was really kind of a centerpiece of much of the campaign in 1992. That is the year that Bill Clinton was elected president. In fact, whether you consider that an irony of history or not, I don't know, but in any event, this is a topic that is very near and dear to the hearts of individuals, and oftentimes is difficult to step back from, as a sociologist would, for many of us at least, to step back from this topic and to really look at it objectively. One of the things that I noticed as I was putting together this PowerPoint slide was trying to find an icon or a photograph, even through Google, of a rather neutral kind of statement of a marriage and family and what it's all about, because nearly all the photographs that you get when you Google this topic, when you look at images at least, call up a husband and a wife, and oftentimes two children, sometimes more, but that very traditional view of marriage and family. And while that is indeed the thing that the institution of marriage seems to be most associated with the United States, and is certainly the things that our political leaders and our religious leaders often point to as the way a family should be, we do know that family life is very different for many of us in the real world out there. And so I wound up with a very kind of neutral little icon about marriage and family here that at least kind of leaves the door open for all sorts of different ideas about family. And so this really kind of leads us into the question about what is family and how is it defined. And from a sociological standpoint, a family is a unit that consists of people who consider themselves related by blood, marriage, or adoption. And this is a very open-ended kind of description, and you can see that a number of different non-traditional ideas of what a family is can be connected to this definition as well. So this is a very broad, very general description: related by blood, marriage, and adoption. It doesn't say they necessarily live together. It doesn't necessarily say that they share resources. It doesn't necessarily say they're heterosexual or homosexual. It doesn't say that that they share bloodlines. It leaves many different possibilities open. As opposed to a family, a household is a group of people that consists of individuals who occupy the same housing unit. So people living under the same roof may or may not be a family according to a sociological definition. There are different types of families that, or at least different ways of framing families as a sociologist looks at it, and the first two kind of connect to each other. One is the nuclear family, and this is the family that we're most used to in American society, and in fact in many industrialized nations. This is the primary family unit, which is a husband, wife, and their immediate children. Now, of course, in today's age, there are many single-parent families, and so this could be a parent and their children, but that is the nuclear family, just the immediate family, what we would consider immediate family. An extended family, however, is the nuclear family along with grandparents, cousins, and other relatives living in the same household or very nearby. This is the family that is the type of family, rather, that the configuration that is most associated with non-industrialized nations, more traditional societies, farming communities, and that type of thing. The Amish societies, which we looked at in the last a few weeks back, is an example of a society where extended family is often the form of the family unit, much more so than a nuclear family, because as the children grow up and marry, they oftentimes build a wing onto the parents' home, and continue to respond to the oldest male in that family. This is oftentimes how an extended family functions. And there are benefits to the extended family that we'll touch on a little bit later, particularly in modern society that we have lost as we focused upon a nuclear family. Two other ways of looking at the family is really kind of how you connect into this family. And so we have our family of orientation, which is the family the family that you grow up in. So this is your mother and father and your siblings. And again, if you're an extended family, this would be cousins and aunts and uncles as well. The family of Another term that is often used for the family of orientation is the family of origin. You'll hear that probably more frequently, and so it's talking about the same thing. The family of procreation is the family that's formed when you begin to have your own children. The family that you create as an adult, that is the family of procreation. Now, the question about mate selection is central to the concept of family, and how is it that we go about picking our mates and deciding who it is that we're going to form our family with. And as Henslin points out, there isn't a society around in any place around the world that doesn't have some norms to govern who gets married to, who connects with who. And there are certain rules about mate selection, and one way of seeing those rules is endogamous versus exogamous. In endogamy, members of the group have to marry within the group. That endo means within, right? So and gamy is marriage. So endogamy, endogamy, marrying within the group. Exogamy, people must marry outside of their group. Can you think about what is our culture? How do we select mates within our culture is what I'm trying to say there. Are we endogamous or exogamous? Now, the first urge you may have is to say we must be exogamous because we can't marry within our own group, thinking in terms of perhaps our family. But when you really consider the kinds of rules we have about what a kind of a typical marriage is all about, you can see that we're very endogamous in our society, in that generally you have to marry somebody within your age group. Now, there are marriages where very young women marry very older men or vice versa. But think about what we say about those kinds of marriages. Generally, we're thinking that somebody's marrying somebody for their money, for instance, or something. We have judgments about that. Or what do we call older women who seem to be sexually attracted to younger men? We have names for those individuals and those kinds of things. So you see, in terms of age, the expectation is that we marry within the group. Likewise, racially speaking, while we have become more open-minded about interracial marriages, very, very much so, the norm is still considered to be marrying somebody from your own racial group, your own religious group, and so on and so on. And so it's pretty clear that in American society, we are endogamous. Descent is traced around the world in different ways. Also, when you think about who we connect to and who we consider to be our primary forebears. In patrilineal societies, father's side of the family determines most of the issues about descent. Matrilineal societies, it is the mother's side that is most important. And in bilineal, both the father and mother's sides are important. For most of us in mainstream American culture, we find that we are bilineal in descent in many respects, except there are some aspects about American society that makes us patrilineal. Not so much true all of the time now as it was, say, 50 or 60 years ago, but generally speaking, when a couple marries, the couple takes on the last name of the husband, which implies a sort of a patrilineal nature to our thinking. And yet, when you think about your own forebears, who do you consider to be your forebears? You generally think about your mother's side and your father's side, so that implies that we're bilineal. Some traditional American cultures and some native cultures are more matrilineal in nature. In fact, I think a general rule of thumb in as we identify tribal lineage for children that we may take custody of in child protection, the general rule of thumb is that it is the mother's side of the mother's tribe that sort of has more authority in the lives of children than on the father's side. Although again, that isn't necessarily true, but that's sort of a general rule of thumb. So there are some matrilineal natures to more traditional societies. In terms of authority, how is authority distributed? There's a patriarchal and matriarchal systems of authority. I think it's fairly clear that we're a social system, generally speaking, which is dominated by men. Here you see some characteristics and common cultural themes in marriage in traditional and industrialized societies, kind of comparing the two of them. So how is the society, or how is the marriage structured? Is it an extended family system or a nuclear family system? Who holds the authority in the household? How many spouses? And you'll see in traditional families, you can very much see that we relate most closely to the post-industrial societies, whereas there are some things in traditional societies that we're not so used to, like there may be more spouses, or that the spouse is selected by the parents, oftentimes the father. That is not the case in industrial societies. This kind of thing. So this is in your book actually, and is a good slide for comparing the two types of societies and how they view marriage and family. Now we look at marriage and family from the three different perspectives in sociology. Each of them have their own particular spin on what the family is all about. In the functionalist perspective, the family is a concept, is a institution that is universal because it fulfills functions that are critical to the health of a society, and this includes things such as sexual control, socialization, care of the sick and the aged, recreation, and economic production. Sexual control meaning that almost all societies have a incest rule. There are one or two exceptions to this, but very few, I believe, that says that you don't mate or breed within a certain level of relationship, biological relationship to another person. And there are considered to be a number of reasons for this that have to do with genetics and those kinds of things. Although I will tell you that there is some argument that says that really that the genetic prohibitions about incest probably aren't as grave as we seem to think they are. But there are other reasons involving competition and those kinds of things that make incest probably an unhealthy kind of thing for a family system. The socialization of the young children, taking care of those who get sick, those kinds of things. These are all functions that a family performs in order to help a society to keep moving forward. Parsons was a sociologist who looked at different roles according to gender, and his writings talked about how men fulfill what's called an instrumental role while women fulfill an expressive role in the family. Now this is very Western, this is very American, this is very 1950s, but nonetheless it is still, I believe, indicative of the way our families are structured in this society, that the role of the husband in a two-parent family is sort of that breadwinner role is the instrumental part. Bringing home the bacon to make sure and doing the chores around the household that needs to keep the house functioning, fixing the plumbing, getting the car run, those kinds of things. Women fulfilling the expressive role in the family, taking care of those who are sick, taking care of those who are hurt emotionally, tending to the emotional needs and the happiness of the members of the family. These are very traditional gender role expectations, but nonetheless, I believe they're very much woven in the fabric of our expectations of families. No matter how much we want to believe we've moved to a more egalitarian type of relationship in marriages and families, these are the kinds of things that still are very much at the foundation of our thinking. The conflict perspective, conflict theorists will look at the family as a reflection of the patriarchal society in which many societies live. That is, it reinforces the concept of men being in charge and women being subservient to men. Some sociologists write, I think Holscheider, I believe, was the name of the sociologist who wrote about the second shift. We used to have an article in our text that we read about the second, in the reader, about the second shift, and it's no longer there. But Hochschild, I'm sorry, there it is right on my slide, is the author who wrote about the second shift, which says basically if you've got a household where there are two working parents, the question is who takes care of all of those duties around the house when they get home. And while again in many families we consider ourselves to be egalitarian, his studies can demonstrated quite the difference. Hochschild's study showed that when the two parents get home at night, that it is almost always the woman whose work continues. She's the one that will oftentimes get the meal on, may clean up after the meal, will get the kids settled down for homework, will get the kids to bed, will take care of the sick kids, and maybe put some things in the laundry, those kinds of things. While in many households, the husband sits down and rests, having worked very hard all the day long. Now, this is what Hochschild referred to as the second shift, and so he suggested that, and many sociologists believe this is one reason why women oftentimes become dissatisfied with their marriage, because they find that they're carrying all the functions of the household as well as working full time. So this imbalance of power is one of the things that it is believed has led to the rising divorce rate within the United States. And the other thing is the redefinition of gender roles since the I think probably going back even further than this, but we can mark it at least at one point in beginning with the feminist movement in the 1960s, which kind of grows out of things that happened in World War II and before. But just say we started our thinking there. The feminist movement really helped to redefine gender roles in our society, and those gender roles within the family unit have also had to shift. And so as those things shift and as those expectations within the family unit change, what was once a given and clearly defined and not up for debate now is open to discussion. And so there are more disagreements, there's more unhappiness, there's more unrealized expectations, let's say, of each other, that because of this negotiation that goes on about gender roles now that wasn't there 50 years ago or so, that may be leading to more divorces and unhappiness in marriages. Just something to think about. Symbolic interactionalists will look at, again, interaction between people, and some of the things that come out of their studies include that husband and wife see their marriages in different light, which causes a lot of dissatisfaction. That women expect certain things, wives expect things from marriages that husbands don't, and vice versa. Sometimes husbands may feel that their marriages are very happy and satisfying, whereas wives do not. So talking among couples is the thing that kind of helps to overcome these differences as they share their perspectives and views of what's going on in the marriage and the family. Studies have showed that both men and women, mothers and fathers, are spending more time in child care and less time in activities outside the home now. This is a positive trend. Men are still seen primarily as the primary wage earner, and women as primarily those child care givers. That goes back to those expressive and utilitarian roles that we were talking about a few slides back. But even though while those traditional expectations are there, each gender is spending more time in the other area according to recent trends. So perhaps the movement is away from the utilitarian and emotional labor or expressive functions in this marriage. When emotional support is needed, this is kind of an interesting thing. We talked about some in my meta-masculinity class as well, that men have a tendency when they need emotional support to go to their wife or partner, and that's certainly, that's understandable given that the woman is traditionally has that expressive role in the marriage, does what is referred to here as the emotional labor in the marriage. But women don't tend to turn to their husbands for emotional support because, well, as we'll talk about more as we get to the section on gender, and I believe you may have read some in the sociology or the socialization unit. We men are not really not trained to be very good at dealing with emotions. We're not raised to be sensitive to those things, and so women, by and large, don't turn to their husbands for emotional support. Will go to other women outside of the family for that. Here's a graph about decision making in the home. This is based on a representative sample from around the nation, and the questions included things like who it is that chooses the activities the family does in a weekend, who buys things for the home, who decides what is on television, who manages the finances of the household, those kinds of things. And you can see here that and as far as the household is concerned, that the wife is the individual who makes more decisions. In generally speaking, if they are not made jointly, and that maybe about a third of them of families that these decisions are divided equally. Now, family, just like the members of the family itself, the family unit has a life cycle, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the factors related to that issue. How we form families is something that I think is a key point and something to consider. In America, our image of marriage is that it grows from two people having fallen in love with each other. That we find in qualities in another person that that just attracts us to another person, and the old tradition things about the birds singing and the music playing and the sun's rising, and how it is all about being in love and stumbling over your own steps, and just when the person comes in the room, an aura there's around this person, and this is the kind of thing we're looking for in most of us are looking for when we look for a partner. We want that kind of special feeling. It is some of it is sexual, certainly, and biological, but we're also looking for qualities in an individual that talks about love when we're looking at a lifetime partner. And there are thinkers, and this goes back into the 60s and 70s. Lederer and Jackson, for instance, wrote a book about the mirages of marriage, and they said that the reason that Americans have so many problems with marriage in the 60s and the 70s and on into today, I would say, is that our marriages are based on romance, this notion of romantic love, and that this is not the rule. This is not necessarily the basis for marriages throughout the world. For instance, many societies have arranged marriages, as we had talked about, the more traditional societies. But also, there are other reasons for getting married that many individuals in industrialized societies have more of an emphasis on than romance and love. It includes things like economic stability, what resources each person can bring to the marriage, what the other person can bring to the marriage that can assure you of a more stable life, and maybe based upon things like religious compatibility, religious compatibility. It could be based on sexual compatibility, lots of different things. But romance as the basis for love is probably a very poor reason, if that is the only reason, if that is the primary reason. The romance as the basis for marriage is probably a very poor reason. In the United States, also, another way of looking at marriage, I guess, is how many do you marry people who are most like you, or do you marry people who are not like you? This is sort of the endogamy and exogamy discussion, and in the United States, it really is based on homogamy. So we tend to marry people who are similar to us, more so than those who are different from us. And those marriages that are based on differences often get a lot of attention, and a lot of people predict doom to that relationship because of the fact that the two aren't similar. Now, we are also monogamous in our society. That means the norm in the United States, at least, is that you have one marriage. You do find little pockets of individuals who practice polygamy in the United States, although it is against the law, the civil law in the United States. But in other parts of the world, polygamy, where you marry more than one person, and generally it's men having many wives. It's not one woman having many husbands. Again, that suggests the patriarchal nature of society. Polygamy is practiced in many different parts of the world. One thing we think about love is that love is blind, and this is probably not true. Our marriages are homogamous. They are largely due to propinquity. Propinquity is spatial nearness. That is, you're more likely to marry somebody who lives within, say, a 50-mile radius of you than somebody who lives across the nation or in another part of the world. Even in the age of the internet and where we meet people from other parts of the world, it is still far more likely for an individual to marry somebody who has grown up in an area very similar and very near to their own. That's propinquity. So what we'll do usually is marry people who live near us, maybe somebody we met at school or work, church, and so this really does suggest this isn't kind of this random sample of persons, because we have these filters, these social filters, that really determine who are around us all the time and who we encounter at work. And we tend to encounter people from the same social class in school, or at least we associate more closely with people from our own social class. We tend to encounter people from our social class at work, and in our churches too. As we noticed when we studied religion and education a few weeks ago, that churches are very much stratified socioeconomically in the United States, and so all of these kinds of things bring people together. And so, really, love is not blind at all. Love is a result of all sorts of filters, putting groups of people together. As we talked about in a patriarchal society, mothers have that expressive, emotional role in the family, the one who does all the emotional labor, and so they are the individuals who take on the majority of child rearing tasks in a married couple. Fathers are becoming increasingly involved with their children, but primary caregiving role continues to rest with the mother in most every traditional home in the United States. A quarter of the children we have now are in daycare. I would bet you that number is rising. And of course, there are concerns about the fact that many daycare centers, even those that might be licensed by the governmental organization, do not always provide quality services because of the fact that daycare staff tend to be paid very poorly. And so again, if you are in a working class family, it is more likely that your children will be in a daycare center during the day, and also those with higher education, where there's more likely, those families with higher education, where it's more likely to have a two-parent wage-earning family or a single parent with one income. Children are more likely to spend time in daycare, so there are also social class issues that affect how parents rear their children. In addition to issues about whether or not kids are raised by other people in daycare, here are some features that reflect the differences in working class and middle class parents in terms of how children are raised. Some of the beliefs about children. Working class parents believing in general that kids will grow up naturally and just kind of let them be, they'll be fine. Whereas middle class parents tend to believe the children need a lot of nurturing, and that we need to be very careful to take care of their emotional needs while they're being raised. Working class parents more likely to set limits and letting kids choose, whereas middle class parents are more likely to guide children into activities to develop specific skills. You can see the kinds of things here, and it's interesting that this list, for instance, with conformity and curiosity and self-expression, that the according to this, the lower socioeconomic, the working class parents tend to be more concerned about conformity and are more likely to use physical discipline than the other group. And I believe I mentioned this in a prior week, but some people believe that has something to do with the kind of work the working class parents do. Those with less education tend to be put in jobs where their decision-making capacity is limited, and the style of authority at work and the work site is more top-down. So that the workers work, they don't make a lot of decisions. Whereas those with higher education and higher incomes tend to be more associated with jobs where there's a participatory kind of nature to the work site, and so those individuals are used to sharing ideas and sharing opinions and thinking things through together, and that those people, thus each set of parents, will carry what they live with all day long into their home and run their families much the same way. So that working class parents are more likely to be focused upon the kids complying and conforming and doing as they're told, and not violating rules, whereas middle class parents looking for kids to be self-expressive and to stand back and not be so conforming. So and of course, again, this also suggests that the lower the socioeconomic group, the more likely it is you are to see the use of physical discipline as well. Here's a graph about childcare, and if we have a working mother in a home, in homes with married couples and single mothers, who takes care of those children with a working mother when there's a preschooler in the home? And you will see here that, of course, about a quarter of the individuals, or children rather, preschoolers, are in a daycare facility. And if you add in other non-relatives and other relatives, you're really talking about babysitters probably and friends. That figure really gets up to, close to 50%. Grandparents also play a big part with single mothers, much more so than with married couples. Finally, for this section, looking at the family life cycle, families have to go through periods of transitions in these kinds of things, and particularly in terms of marriage. The text talks about marital satisfaction following a U-curve. In other words, that marital satisfaction, and this is different from happiness. Marital happiness is a different concept, all right? But marital satisfaction, being satisfied with what's going on in the relationship, might not necessarily mean you're happy, but you're satisfied. Okay, that at the beginning, and early in the marriage, and during that retirement stage, marital satisfaction tends to be at its highest. That when for a number of different reasons, with or without children for that matter, that's true, but also with the arrival of the first child, marital satisfaction tends to drop pretty dramatically. And some of this has to do with having to realign how one relates to each other, all those new duties, those new responsibilities, the new financial burdens, the having to learn how to be a parent, all those kinds of things. Satisfaction in the marriage tends to decrease. The sex life drops off quite a bit in general when a child arrives in the home, and number of different factors that contribute to a decrease in marital satisfaction. But when that empty nest stage is reached, satisfaction begins to go back up, and that's really quite contrary to what we tend to think about what empty nesters. And those of you who are young children, or the youngest in the home, I'm just going to tell you this, don't worry so much about your mom and dad. They'll probably be okay. There are a lot of theories about that, and they're probably going to be more comfortable being just the two of them again than they'll let you know. However, 42% of children ages 24 to 29 are still living at home today, and this is they're being called the boomerang generation. They leave home for school or go out and get a job, and then find out it's more difficult to function in society, economically speaking at least, than they expected, and they come back to the parents that kind of help get on their feet a little more until they're earning more money or more stabilized in terms of their lifestyle. I believed during the socialization section talked about this new stage of development that sociologists and psychologists are talking about now, the emerging adulthood. This is what we're talking about here, and this is why this life cycle is now at this stage is being acknowledged. That there is an awareness with the economics of this day and age that graduating from college doesn't guarantee you a good job and even a living wage. And so, and even if you do have a job, there's still many things developing in your personality and in your sense of self and in determining where you're heading in terms of your career and your life and what you want to do with yourselves. And so sociologists, psychologists, family theorists have begun to recognize this stage of young adulthood where children aren't necessarily expected to have made all the decisions that will determine the course of their life. And children, I'm meaning young adults, aren't necessarily expected to have made all those decisions. Part of that process it seems, is that almost half of kids into their late 20s, children into their late 20s, are still living at home with their parents. So that will end the first section of this week's lecture. Part two, we'll talk a little bit more about some other factors in issues of marriage and family. And specifically, we'll also look at current trends. And so take a break and come back and open up the next section when you get the opportunity. Thanks.